Today, I would like to share a story with you. A story about heartbreak, a story about the very judgmental part of our minds that we can call the superego, the inner judge, the inner critic. And it is a story about my younger self 20 years ago. But also, actually, it is a story about you because we all experience heartbreak and we all have an inner judge, an inner critic to deal with throughout our lifetime. So, remember last time I talked about the superego, our critical mind that can get in the way of our relationships and of good listening. And it is the part of our mind that tells us that we are too dumb, too smart, too tall, too small, too fat, too thin, too sensitive, too insensitive. It is the part of our mind that constantly comments and criticizes and compares and attacks and basically undermines us and our relationship with others and our relationship to ourselves. So I just wanted to demonstrate that with a story about my younger self. So 20 years ago, I experienced a very, very painful heartbreak. A relationship that I was in for 15 years came to an end, and I felt devastated, I felt heartbroken, I felt lost, I felt painfully lonely. And at the time, I didn't just have to deal with the heartbreak of a long-term, significant, formative relationship in my life, but it also unearthed my childhood wounds of abandonment, betrayal, that were kind of flushed up from the unconscious into my mind, and it was very overwhelming. And at the time, I spent quite a bit of time with a very good friend who is also a psychotherapist and a psychologist, and we were kind of supporting each other with our lives, and I shared with her my thoughts and feelings. And at some point she said, "Do you know what, Kirsten? Did you realize that you have a very cruel superego?" And I said, "No, what do you mean?" And she said, "You are blaming yourself constantly for the end of this relationship. You believe that you have ruined the relationship. You're telling yourself horror stories about your future, that you will never love again, that no one will ever love you again, that you will not be able to ever love again. And you just keep attacking yourself at this difficult time. And it's really actually hard to hear and hard to listen to." And I was quite taken aback at the time. I had not been aware of this. And I'm endlessly grateful to my friend who was so straightforward with me and so observant and perceptive. And having quite a reflective mind myself, from that moment on, I really turned my attention in to myself to get to know this inner judge. And my goodness, it was constantly on at me. It was telling me, it was shaming and blaming me about being single. I was ashamed to be single. I was very ashamed of not having had children yet at this point in my life. And I became aware how this part of my mind really was very mean at the time of my deepest vulnerabilities. And the more I became aware of it, the more I made a commitment to myself to become more conscious of my inner judge and to harness and rein in this destructive force. And I wanted to become a friend of my vulnerability and not an enemy. I thought that is really cruel. At the point in my life where I was at my knees, to have this part of my mind kind of shaming and blaming me. I thought that is cruel. And I think the crux of the story is that we all have an inner judge. We all have an inner judge, which is part of our development, as I talked about in my last video. And we all have the opportunity to kind of become more conscious of this mostly unconscious part of our minds. The inner judge, this part of our mind which is kind of interwoven into our mindset, into our personality, can be very insidious. It's hard to detect sometimes. It's mostly unconscious. So the invitation is, certainly the invitation and the calling for me at this point in my life was, I had to do some work on my inner judge to become more conscious and aware of it, so that I could moderate and tame this destructive force that made my life hell, that made this breakup hell. And I must say, I've experienced loss and a couple of breakups since. And whilst they were painful, but they weren't hell. And that's the difference. So the thought I want to leave you with is that when we struggle, when we are heartbroken, when we experience maybe this depression, anxiety, or any emotional struggle, the opportunity is to introspect and to learn about our superego, our inner judge, because this part of our mind causes us suffering and pretty much gets in the way of a loving relationship with ourselves, but also others. And it can be very liberating to find and make aware and become conscious of this part of our minds, because that means we then have the power to change and to transform and to evolve our mind, to evolve our inner critical mind into a mind that is supportive, encouraging, loving, which is what we need, especially when we go through heartbreak, through loss, through difficult times of our life.